Welcome to Headline News. This is Maria Han. Justice Clarence Thomas dissents from Supreme Court on election case. Quote, "We need to make it clear." The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday, February 22nd, by a 6-3 decision, declined to hear multiple lawsuits over the 2020 election controversy. In response, Justice Clarence Thomas filed a written dissenting opinion. He said there are problems with the election system and that the Supreme Court's decision is not enough to restore voter confidence, while potentially having disastrous consequences for future U.S. elections. Other than Thomas, Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch also dissented. In his dissenting opinion, Justice Thomas said, "An election system lacks clear rules when, as here, different officials dispute who has authority to set or change those rules. This kind of dispute brews confusion because voters may not know which rules to follow. Even worse, with more than one system of rules in place, competing candidates might each declare victory under different sets of rules." He pointed out that the Supreme Court declined to hear the Pennsylvania case because they believed that the Pennsylvania High Court's decision was insufficient to affect the outcome of the U.S. election and the outcome of the Pennsylvania election. The Supreme Court's refusal to hear the case is inexplicable. In order to be responsible for future elections in the United States, the Supreme Court should rule on whether state executive officers who are not legislative officials have the authority to make election rules. He wrote, "If state officials have the authority they have claimed, we need to make it clear. If not, we need to put an end to this practice now before the consequences become catastrophic." We are fortunate that many of the cases we have seen alleged only improper rule changes, not fraud, Thomas added, but that observation provides only small comfort. An election free from strong evidence of systemic fraud is not alone sufficient for election confidence. Also important is the assurance that fraud will not go undetected. He also singled out Pennsylvania as an example of the unconstitutional problems in several states in the 2020 election. The Constitution gives to each state legislature authority to determine the manner of federal elections, yet both before and after the 2020 election, non-legislative officials in various states took it upon themselves to set the rules instead. As a result, we received an unusually high number of petitions and emergency applications contesting those changes. The petitions here present a clear example. Changing the rules in the middle of the game is bad enough. Such rule changes by officials who may lack authority to do so is even worse. The Pennsylvania legislature established an unambiguous deadline for receiving mail-in ballots, 8 p.m. on Election Day. Dissatisfied, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court extended that deadline by 3 days. The court also ordered officials to count ballots received by the new deadline even if there was no evidence, such as a postmark, that the ballots were mailed by Election Day. That decision to rewrite the rules seems to have affected too few ballots to change the outcome of any federal election, but that may not be the case in the future. These cases provide us with an opportunity to address just what authority non-legislative officials have to set election rules, and to do so well before the next election cycle. The refusal to do so is inexplicable. Canadian Parliament passes motion declaring genocide against Uighurs in China. The Canadian Parliament voted overwhelmingly 266-0 in favor of a conservative motion that says the Chinese Communist Party's treatment of the Uighur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang region constitutes genocide. The motion also calls on the Canadian government to withdraw from the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics in light of the CCP's human rights abuses. After 2 days of parliamentary debate last week, members of Canada's 5 major political parties voted yesterday, February 22nd, on the genocide of Uighurs in Xinjiang. The motion was passed by an overwhelming 266-0 vote, ruling that the persecution of Uyghur Muslims by the Chinese Communist Party is genocide. Reuters reported that the temporary motion was proposed by Canada's opposition Conservative Party, hoping to pressure Justin Trudeau's government to agree to follow through. The motion was passed by the House of Commons, 338 seats, with 266 votes in favor and 0 votes against. According to reports, while Trudeau and most cabinet members abstained from the vote, Liberal backbenchers generally voted in favor of the motion, as did most opposition lawmakers. A backbencher is a non-cabinet member of the governing party. This makes Canada the second country after the United States to find the Chinese Communist Party guilty of genocide. It is interesting to note that Trudeau has been reluctant to use the word genocide to describe the CCP's actions against the Uighurs. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau said in the House of Commons that he chose to abstain from the vote on behalf of the Government of Canada. Trudeau's Conservative Party opponents have been pressuring him to be tougher on the Chinese Communist Party. Diplomatic relations between Canada and China have continued to deteriorate since December 2018, when Canada arrested Huawei's Princess and CFO Meng Wanzhou on a U.S. arrest warrant. After its best efforts to mediate the arrest failed, Beijing detained 2 Canadians in May of the following year due to suspicion of endangering national security. Citing testimonies, documents, and media reports of human rights violations against the Uighur people, Conservative Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs MP Michael Chung, who introduced the motion, said the evidence is clear that the Chinese Communist Party has committed a variety of human rights violations, and that Canada's relationship with China needs to be re-examined on many levels, including the Magnitsky sanctions, economic sanctions, and next year's Olympics. Chong said that the persecution of millions of Uighurs is something Canada cannot ignore, and Canada needs to adjust its policy towards China. We can no longer ignore this. We must call it for what it is, a genocide, he stressed. Prior to the vote on the motion, 13 Canadian MPs from all 5 major federal parties in Canada called on the International Olympic Committee to not allow Beijing to host the 2022 Winter Olympics if the Chinese Communist Party continues to persecute Uyghur Muslims. Facebook compromises and unblocks Australian news pages. Social media giant Facebook said February 23rd that it will lift its block on Australian news pages in the coming days after the Australian government agreed to conditionally change its world precedent of paid news media laws. Although the two sides appear to have reached an agreement, Canberra authorities have criticized Facebook for apparently going too far and making the wrong decision, which could ruin its goodwill in Australia. In a statement today, Facebook noted that after further discussions with the Australian government, it has agreed in principle to make a number of changes and assurances to address Facebook's core concerns, and Facebook is satisfied. Australian Finance Minister Josh Frydenberg also said today that the two sides have reached a consensus on several key areas of a law that would force digital giants to pay news organizations after negotiations. Australia's Canberra government has made final changes to the proposed media trading law, which will be voted on and passed soon. The changes include a 2-month period for digital platforms and publishers to negotiate. Will Easton, a general manager of Facebook for the Australia and New Zealand region, said in a statement, "As a result of these changes, we can now work to further our investment in public interest journalism and restore news on Facebook for Australians in the coming days." Sky News Australia, The Australian, ABC, and other Australian news media Facebook pages, as well as a number of state government and emergency department Facebook accounts, were all blocked by Facebook last Thursday. The Australian people woke up early that morning and suddenly could not see any news content in Facebook Dynamic News. The Canberra authorities have criticized Facebook's surprise boycott of Australian legislation as heavy-handed and a wrong decision. Australian Finance Minister Josh Frydenberg told the media that Facebook did not give notice prior to revoking Australian users' permission to repost news links or view the Facebook pages of global news media. Frydenberg said, Facebook was wrong. Facebook's actions were unnecessary. They were heavy-handed and they will damage its reputation here in Australia. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.